Hey, my name is Cole Barrett. I'm 36 years old, and I've farmed the same patch of ground outside a town called Elkhorn my entire life, cattle and hay, the way my father did and his father before him. I've never lived anywhere else, never wanted to. Some men are born with one foot out the door. I was born with both feet in the dirt of one particular hillside, and I've spent my whole life keeping it, fixing what breaks, calving in the cold, cutting hay in the heat, and being, by every account, the most reliable and least remarkable man in the county. That's not false modesty. I'm a fence mender, a quiet one. I say what needs saying and not one word past it, and I've made a life out of being the man people can count on and never have to wonder about. I'm the one they call when the calving goes wrong at 2 a.m, the one who shows up with a chainsaw after a storm, the one who sits with a man at a hard time and doesn't need to fill the quiet with talk. Half the marriages in this valley I've helped move a couch for, half the funerals I've dug the neighbor's share of. And I've done it all alone, come home to an empty house every night of my adult life, and told anyone who asked that I just never found the right one, which was the biggest lie I ever told because I found her at 17 and then I gave her away. But there's a thing about me nobody in Elkhorn knows. A thing I've carried so long and so silent, it's practically load-bearing. And I might as well tell you now, because the whole rest of the story is built on it. I have been in love with the same woman for 15 years, and for all but the last 2 of them, she was married to my best friend. Her name is Hannah. We were all 3 of us kids together, Hannah and me and a boy named Danny Rhodes, who was closer to me than any brother. The 3 of us running these hills barefoot from the time we could walk. And somewhere around 17, I looked at Hannah across a bonfire and understood, the way you understand weather coming, that she was the whole of it for me, that there would never be anybody else. And I was about to say something. That summer, I'd made up my mind. And then I saw the way Danny looked at her, and the way she'd started looking back at Danny, and I understood that too, and I made a choice that has defined my entire life. I stepped aside. I never said a word. I want you to understand, it wasn't a grand noble gesture. Nothing so clean as that. It was 100 small swallowings, over months. It was being the one who drove them to the picture show and sat on the other side of Hannah so Danny could hold her hand. It was giving the toast at the engagement dinner with my chest full of broken glass and smiling so hard my face ached. It was deciding, a little more each day, that her happiness weighed more than mine, and that if the cost of her being happy was me being quiet forever, then quiet was a price I could pay. Because I'd rather have her joyful and married to my best friend than have her know a truth that would only make 3 people miserable. I stood up as Danny's best man 2 years later, and I meant every bit of the toast. And I loved them both, and I buried the thing I felt so deep that most days I could almost pretend it wasn't there. I became Uncle Cole, godfather to their kids, the reliable friend who was always around, who fixed their tractor and mended their fence and taught their boy to fish, and I loved that family with everything I had, and I never once, not one single time in 15 years, let Hannah see what was underneath it. Because she was happy. Danny made her happy, and he was my best friend, and a decent man does not covet the one good thing he handed to the person he loves most. So I didn't. I honored it. I built my whole quiet life in the margins of theirs and told myself the loving from a distance was enough, and it almost was. Right up until 2 summers ago, when Danny's tractor rolled on the north slope of his own hayfield and took my best friend out of the world in an afternoon, and left me alone with a widow I'd loved for 15 years and a guilt so total I could hardly breathe. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about a love like mine. When the obstacle to it dies, you don't feel free. You feel like a monster. Danny was 2 years in the ground, and my oldest, most buried feeling had started, God help me, to stir again. to lift its head after 15 years of lying still, and every time it did, I felt like I'd been standing over my best friend's grave the whole time, just waiting. Like some vulture, like the worst kind of man there is, the kind who wants his dead friend's wife. I would rather have died than be that man. So I did the only thing I know how to do with a feeling I'm not allowed to have. I turned it into work. That's the summer this is really about. The summer I fixed the widow's fence. The fence between our two places had been Danny's to keep up, the long boundary line that ran the whole length where his ground met mine. And after 2 winters without him, it was sagging and broken, posts rotted, wire down, cattle getting through. And that spring, I just started fixing it. Post by post, the whole length of it, all summer long, in the evenings after my own work was done. I'd load the truck with posts and wire, and I'd drive the line, and I'd mend it, and when Hannah came out and tried to pay me, I wouldn't take a dime. I'd say it's neighbor stuff, Hannah, it's nothing, don't you worry about it, and I'd get back to it. And I told myself I was being a good neighbor, honoring Danny by looking after his family, and all of that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that mending that fence was the only way I had left to love her. It was safe. It was deniable. A man can pour 15 years of unspeakable feeling into a fence line and call it neighborly, and nobody has to know, least of all her, that every post he sets is a word he'll never say. I loved Hannah Rhodes one fence post at a time all summer long, because it was the only language I'd ever let myself use, and I figured I'd go on doing it, quietly, for the rest of my life. The loyal friend fixing what breaks, and never once crossed the line I'd drawn at 17. There's a particular kind of evening I'll carry to my grave from that summer. The light going long in gold across the hay, the cattle settling, the sound of the wire stretcher in the mall, and off across the field the lights coming on in Hannah's kitchen one by one. I'd worked till I couldn't see the wire anymore, later than the job needed, because as long as I was on that fence line I was still, in some deniable way, with her, and the second I loaded the truck I'd be alone again, in my own dark house, with a feeling I couldn't name out loud. I mended posts Danny had set with his own hands, and sometimes I'd find his initials carved in an old one, DR. And a year, the way he marked things, and I'd run my thumb over them and have to sit down on the tailgate for a minute. I was fixing my dead best friend's fence and falling deeper every evening for my dead best friend's wife. And the two things were so tangled up in me, the grief and the love and the guilt, that I couldn't have pulled one strand loose without the whole thing coming apart. Her kids didn't make it easy. Maddie's 11 now and Toby's 8, and they are the closest thing to my own I'll ever have, and losing their dad broke something in both of them that I've spent 2 years trying to help hold together. Toby took to following me down the fence line that summer, handing me staples, learning to set a post, and he'd talk the whole time, about his dad mostly. About how his dad used to do this exact thing, and I'd say your dad taught me half of what I know about fence, buddy, which was true, and Toby would get quiet and proud, and I'd have to look hard at the wire so he wouldn't see my face. Maddie, older, watchful, would bring us lemonade and sit on the tailgate and tell me things she couldn't tell her mother, the way kids will with an uncle. And one evening she said, "Out of nowhere, Mom smiles when your truck comes up the lane," and I said something gruff about lemonade and changed the subject, but it went into me like a splinter and stayed. Because I'd noticed it too. That was the trouble. All that summer I'd been noticing things I had no business noticing. The way Hannah had started coming out to the fence line more than the work required. The way she'd started laughing again, and how some of that laughing was aimed at me. The way she'd fixed her hair, once or twice, on evenings I was coming. 2 years of grief had started, slowly to lift off her, and underneath it was a woman coming back to life, and I watched it happen with my heart in my throat, terrified, because the more alive she got, the harder it was to keep pretending I was just fixing a fence, and every hopeful thing I noticed I immediately drowned in guilt. Because what kind of man reads hope into his dead best friend's widow? There was one evening that nearly undid me before the supper ever did. A storm had come up fast the way they do out here, and I was racing to get the last of a stretch tied off before it hit, and Hannah came running down from the house with a slicker for me, and we ended up caught in it together. The two of us sheltering under the big cottonwood at the corner of the property, while the rain came down in sheets, close, laughing, soaked, and for about 30 seconds it was just a man and a woman under a tree in a summer storm, and I forgot. I actually forgot. The whole architecture of guilt I'd built. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and the air went taut as new wire. And I saw her lips part like she might say something, and then the old voice slammed down inside me. Danny's wife, Danny's wife. And I stepped back out into the rain to finish the fence like a coward, and I felt her watch me go. That was the night I understood I couldn't keep doing this, that being near her was going to break me or break my resolve, and I made my quiet decision to finish the line and disappear. So I started, toward the end of that summer, to pull back. To come at times I knew she'd be busy, to keep it short, keep it to the fence, decline the coffee. Because being near her had become unbearable, the wanting and the shame of the wanting all tangled up, and I'd decided the honorable thing, the only thing, was to finish the fence and then find reasons to be scarce, to love that family from a greater and greater distance until the feeling starved back down to where it belonged. I had it all worked out. And then, on a gold evening in late August, I set the last post in the last stretch of that boundary fence, the whole line finally sound end to end. 2 summers' worth of Danny's neglected work finally done, and I was loading my tools into the truck to leave, for good in a way, though only I knew it, and Hannah came down the lane in the long light, and she stood there a minute watching me. And then she said the thing that broke my careful plan in half. "Cole," I turned around. "It's getting dark," she said, "and you've been out here every evening all summer fixing a fence you won't let me pay a cent for. And I've been standing at that window watching you do it, and I think we both know it stopped being about the fence a while ago." She took a breath, and I saw it cost her something, saw her push past 2 years of grief and a lifetime of being another man's wife to say it. "Would you stay for supper tonight?" "Not as a thank you." "I've thanked you enough. Just stay. The kids want you to. I want you to." "Would you stay for supper, Cole?" And I want to tell you I said yes. I want to tell you that 15 years of loving that woman came pouring out right there in the gold light with the finished fence behind us. But I didn't. Because the second she said it, the second the door I'd wanted my whole life actually opened, every ounce of guilt I'd been carrying rose up and slammed it shut from the inside. Staying for supper meant crossing the line. It meant being, at last, the thing I'd been terrified of being, the man who wanted Danny's wife, and standing in the kitchen where I'd toasted their wedding. At the table where Danny used to sit felt like the worst betrayal a man could commit. So I did the cruelest, most cowardly thing I have ever done. I said, "I can't, Hannah, I couldn't even look at her. It wouldn't be right." I was Danny's best friend. People would talk. "I'm just fixing the fence. That's all this is. I'm sorry, I've got to get back." And I got in my truck and I drove away from the only thing I've ever wanted. And I watched in the mirror as Hannah stood alone by the finished fence in the last of the light, and her face, before I lost sight of it, was the face of a woman who'd finally been brave and gotten slapped for it. And I told myself I'd done the honorable thing. I stopped coming around after that. Completely. I finished pulling my tools and I found reasons, and the reasons became a wall, and I didn't answer when Toby called about going fishing. And I let 2 weeks go by, then 3, punishing myself, starving the feeling, being the good man I decided a good man had to be, which apparently meant abandoning a grieving family and breaking a woman's nerve and a boy's heart to protect my own idea of my own decency. It was Earl who came for me. Earl Rhodes is Danny's father, 74 years old, been farming the next place over his whole life, watched me and Danny grow up in these hills, buried his own son 2 summers back, and never once let it bend him. And one evening in September he drove up my lane, which he had not done in years, and he got out slow, and he stood in my yard and he said, "You want to tell me why my grandson thinks his Uncle Cole is mad at him? Why my daughter-in-law has gone quiet as a stone again after a whole summer of finally coming back to life? You want to tell me what happened at that fence, Cole Barrett? Or do I have to guess? Because I think I already know, and I've thought I've known for about 15 years. I stared at him, and Earl Rhodes looked at me with Danny's own eyes in his old face and said, "Sit down on that step, son. I've got something to tell you that I should have told you the day of the funeral, and I've been waiting for you to need it. You loved her first, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, the first time in 15 years I'd admitted it to a living soul. And something came loose in my chest that had been clenched so long it had forgotten how to open. "I knew," Earl said, lowering himself onto the step beside me. Danny knew too. And the world stopped. "You think a man doesn't know his best friend?" Earl said quietly. "Danny knew you loved Hannah back when you were all 3 kids. He knew you'd stepped aside for him. He told me once, years ago, that the biggest thing he ever got in his life he got because Cole Barrett was too good a man to fight him for it, and that he never felt like he fully deserved her because he'd always known she'd had 2 men who loved her and only one of them was noble enough to step back. That was Danny's word for you. Noble, he carried it his whole life, what you did." Earl was quiet a moment, looking out over the darkening fields toward the fence I'd spent the summer on. "You know what he said to me, that last Christmas, the 2 of us out on the porch with a bottle? He said, 'Dad, if anything ever happens to me, Cole'll take care of them. I don't even have to ask him. He'll just do it, because that's who he is, and he'll do it quiet, and he'll never take a thing for himself, and somebody's going to have to make him.' He knew. He knew exactly how this would go, right down to you fixing that fence for free and running from her table. He knew you better than you know yourself, son, and he loved you for the very thing that was about to ruin you." Earl reached into his coat and took out an envelope, worn soft, my name on the front in Danny's blocky hand. He wrote this the year he had the cancer scare, before it turned out to be nothing. Wrote a few of them in case, gave them to me to hold. Most of them I gave out at the funeral. This one he told me to hold back. Said, "Don't give Cole his till he needs it, Dad. He'll know the day." Cole always knows the day. And Earl put my dead best friend's letter in my hands and got up and walked to his truck to give me the privacy of it, and I sat on my step in the September dark and opened the last thing Danny Rhodes would ever say to me, and I'm going to tell you what it said because I've read it 10,000 times and I know it by heart. It said, "Cole, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry, and I need you to do the hardest thing I've ever asked you. You stepped aside for me once. I always knew. I never said, because I was selfish enough to want her and not brave enough to talk about how I got her. But I knew every day of my marriage that I was living the life you'd stepped back to give me. So here's what I'm asking. Don't step aside from her now. Don't you dare. You've spent 15 years being noble at your own expense, and I've spent 15 years letting you. And I won't let you do it one more time from beyond the grave. Take care of Hannah. Take care of my kids, who love you. And when you're ready, and when she's ready, love her, Cole, out loud. This time. You've loved her longer than I got to. She was always big enough for both our whole lives. I had my turn, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, and now I want you to have yours, and if you spend it feeling guilty on my account, I will haunt you. I mean it. I'll rattle every gate on your place. Be happy. Both of you. That's the last thing I'll ever ask, and it's the only thing I want. Your brother, Danny, I sat on that step a long time. And when I finally looked up, Earl was leaning on his truck, and he said, he didn't want his family to freeze in the ground with him. Cole, that's the thing you've got backwards. You think staying away honors my son, but the one thing that had truly dishonored Danny is his best friend and his wife and his kids all choosing to be miserable and alone out of some idea of loyalty he specifically, in writing, released you from. He picked you. Do you understand me? Of all the men in the world who could look after his family, he picked the one who'd loved her longest. That wasn't him being generous. That was him being smart. Now get in your truck and go fix the one thing on that whole property you left broken, which is not the fence. I went. I have never driven those back roads faster. I came up Hannah's lane in the near dark with Danny's letter on the seat beside me, and she came to the door, and her face when she saw me was careful and hurt and guarded. A woman who'd been brave once and wasn't going to be brave twice, and I stood at the bottom of her steps, the steps I'd avoided for 3 weeks, and I said the whole thing, finally, out loud, the way Danny told me to. You asked me to stay for supper, I said, and I ran, and I told you it was about Danny, about doing the right thing, and that was a lie, or half of one. Here's the true half. I've been in love with you since I was 17 years old, Hannah, before Danny. I saw you first, at a bonfire, and I knew. And then I saw the two of you, and I stepped aside, and I never said a word. Not for 15 years, not once. I loved you the whole time you were married, and I never let it show. Because you were happy, and he was my best friend, and I'd sooner have died. And when he passed, I didn't feel free. I felt like a monster, like I'd been waiting, and I couldn't stand it, so I fixed your fence all summer because it was the only way I could love you that didn't feel like a sin. And when you asked me to supper, I ran, because staying meant admitting I wanted the thing I've told myself for 15 years I had no right to want. I climbed one step, and then Danny's father brought me a letter Danny wrote before he died. And I need you to read it, because it's not mine to keep from you, and because it turns out I've been the last person in 3 counties to understand what everyone else already knew. And I put my best friend's letter in his widow's hands, and Hannah read it there in the porch light. And I watched her come apart and knit back together, watched 15 years of a thing she'd never known rearrange her whole understanding of her own life, and when she got to the part about, I want you to have yours, she pressed her hand to her mouth. And when she finished, she looked up at me with tears streaming and Danny's blessing in her hands, and she said, You loved me at that bonfire. You were 17. I've loved you at every age I've been since, I said. I just never had permission. From him, from myself. Now I've got it from both, in his own handwriting, and I'm standing at your steps like a fool 2 years and 3 weeks too late. And I'm asking, if it's not too late if I haven't broken it, Hannah, would the invitation still stand? Could I stay for supper tonight? She was quiet a moment, and I braced for it, braced to be told I'd had my chance and run from it, which I'd have deserved. And then she said, Lo, do you know what the worst part of the last 3 weeks was? It wasn't that you turned me down. I could have survived that. It was that you turned me down and then vanished, and I thought I'd lost not just the maybe of something, but the whole of you. The friend, the one steady thing left standing after Danny. I thought I'd ruined 15 years of us by wanting 5 more minutes of it. Her voice broke. You've been the thing holding this family up, Cole. You have been holding us up for 2 years. And I stood at that window all summer watching you mend that fence, and I fell in love with you the exact same slow way you were falling for me. And I had no idea, none, that you'd been carrying me since we were kids. And Hannah Rhodes came down the steps with her late husband's blessing in one hand, and she put the other on the side of my face. The first time she'd ever touched me like that in a lifetime of knowing me, and she said, The kids set your place an hour ago. They saw your truck from the window. Toby wouldn't let me clear it even when you didn't come. He said, Uncle Cole always comes eventually. And I went inside, at last, into the warm kitchen where I'd toasted their wedding, to the table where Danny used to sit. And Toby launched into me at a dead run, and Maddie tried to be too grown up to cry and didn't manage it, and I sat down in a chair a good man had told me, in writing, to sit in, and I stayed for supper, and I have stayed every night since. We took it slow, after, because grief is real, and a town talks, and 2 kids had already lost one father and couldn't lose the feeling of the man who'd quietly stepped into the gap. But Elkhorn, when it understood the shape of the thing, when Earl Rhodes himself made a point of telling the story of his son's letter to anyone who'd listen, decided it was the most rightful match in the valley, and closed around us warm. We were married the next summer, out by the fence of all places, because Hannah said it was where I'd been proposing to her all along, 1 post at a time, and I couldn't argue. Earl walked her down the aisle in his son's place and with his son's blessing, and there was not a dry eye in the county. Toby stood up beside me as my best man, 11 years old in a borrowed tie, because I told him I couldn't get married without the boy who'd handed me staples all that summer, and he took the job more seriously than any grown man ever took anything. Maddie read a poem she wrote herself about how love isn't a thing that runs out, but a thing that makes more of itself, and how her dad would have liked the man her mom picked, and she got through about half of it before Earl had to come stand beside her, and the 2 of them finished it together. I looked out at that little gathering by the fence, at Earl and the kids and the whole valley that had decided to be happy for us, and I thought about the 17-year-old boy at the bonfire who'd swallowed the truth to make room for everyone else's happiness, and I wished I could reach back through all those years and tell him it turns out right in the end, son. Just hang on. It turns out right. The strangest, best thing is what happened to the fence. It ran the boundary line between our 2 places for 100 years, the thing that marked where Danny's ground ended and mine began, and I spent a whole guilty summer mending it. And the spring after we married, we took it down. The middle of it, anyway. We joined the 2 places into 1 working farm, Hannah's and mine. Danny's kids growing up on the whole of it, and the boundary fence I'd poured 15 years of unspeakable love into became, in the end, not a line between us, but the thing that had drawn me across, evening after evening, until there was no line left. Toby's 12 now, and he can set a post as true as his father could. And I taught him, the way Danny taught me. And we keep the outer fences tight, and we let the inner ones stay down, and every time I drive that lane I think about the summer I loved a woman 1 fence post at a time, because I didn't believe I was allowed to love her out loud. Danny's picture is on the wall in the front room, and the kids talk about their dad every day, and we honor him, always, because loving Hannah was never about erasing Danny. It was the last thing Danny asked me to do, and I do it in his honor as much as my own. I keep his letter in the drawer of the bedside table, and on the hard days, and there are still hard days, grief doesn't run on a schedule, I take it out and read your brother, Danny in his blocky hand, and I remember that the most generous thing anyone ever did for me was give me, in writing, permission to stop being noble and start being happy. I asked Earl once, before he passed last winter, 90 and ready, why Danny told him to hold my letter back, to wait until I needed it. And Earl said, "Because Danny knew you, son. He knew you'd try to be noble right up to the edge of ruining everything, and he wanted you to have his blessing in your hand at the exact moment your own goodness was about to cost you the whole rest of your life." He timed it from the grave. That was Danny. He always did know the day. I think that's the thing that finally broke the guilt open in me for good. Sitting with Earl that evening, not just that Danny had forgiven me, but that he'd planned for me, that even dying he'd been looking out for the friend who'd looked out for him, arranging things so that his best man and his wife and his children would land soft. You don't honor a love like that by refusing the gift inside it. So here's what I've got for you if you've read this far into a fence mender's story. If there's a love in your life you've decided you have no right to, some feeling you've buried so deep and so long you've turned it into work, into service, into anything but the words, because saying it plainly feels like a betrayal or a sin or a thing a good person wouldn't want. This is me telling you from the far side of nearly throwing away the great love of my life to protect an idea of my own decency. Sometimes the noble thing and the loving thing are the same thing, and you're the only one who can't see it. Sometimes the person you think you'd be dishonoring is the very one cheering you on. Don't spend 15 years, or 50, mending a fence when what you were built to do was cross it. The boundaries we're so sure we can't cross are, more often than we'd ever admit, just fears we've dressed up in the good clothes of duty. I almost did. It took a letter from a dead man to stop me. Don't be as slow as I was. And if you'd stay a while longer with us, subscribe and let the next story keep you company. There's always a warm light on here at Lamplight, and the kettle's on, and there's a place set at the table, and it's been set for you a long, long time. Longer than you know. Longer than you've let yourself believe.